We're talking about taxation, income tax predominantly, and I want to talk about terminology. Terminology. There you go. Terminology. Well, that's a big word for a Monday morning, isn't it? Terminology. And legislation, and the various things that come through. So first of all, what are the laws which govern income tax? What are the laws really? Well, there's a majority of laws really are combined each year, and I'll explain how it works. Now, 1988 is the last Finance Act, sort of conglomeration act really, that consolidated all sorts of legislation. But what happens with income tax is you have a lot of case law. Now, case law is where a judge, judges a case, and that case law becomes almost how they operate moving forward. That's known as case law. You also have, of course, the budget, which occurs each year. The budget produces a finance bill, kill the bill kind of thing, which we've been arguing against a previous bill. But bills are to going through Parliament. It then goes through Parliament and it becomes an act. That's why it has to be approved by Parliament. So the budget or the finance bill becomes a finance act, and that gets incorporated into the various acts of Parliament for income tax. So that's just a little bit of background for you. But remember the budget. It does produce the government's thinking about taxation. Now, you've probably heard of the fiscal year. Let's put that one up for you. The fiscal year. For some unknown reason, I think it's to do with the Gregorian calendar or something. The fiscal year is April to April. So it starts on the 6th of April and it finishes on the following 5th of April. So that's the fiscal year. That's when all of your income is drawn up for various sources and then taxed accordingly in the fiscal year. It's not done in the calendar year. So that's fine. That's easy enough, isn't it? Other terms for you. Here's one for you, residence. Here we are, residence. You've probably come across in your reading. Now, residence means that you have to be a UK resident in order to pay UK tax, which makes sense. We're talking about income tax and capital gains tax predominantly. Now, to be a UK resident for tax purposes, you have to be in this country for at least 6 months or 183 days. So do you remember these terms from school? More, at least that's like the mathematical terminology for 183 days, which in my book is half a year. So that's the main test that they do to make sure you are a UK resident. Now, there is a residential test which they can run if it's doubtful or if you're not quite sure, and this test looks at all sorts of other aspects around your residency. But if you're resident and domiciled, and I'll come on to domicile in a second for you, then you are subject to UK income tax on your worldwide income, plus capital gains tax as well. So that's the whole point. So if you're a UK resident, you're subject to UK income and capital gains tax. But I think you kind of knew that anyway, didn't you? Now, when I say worldwide taxation, worldwide income, it's not actually that simple, because every country in the world pretty much takes tax from their citizens. It's what we do, isn't it? It's what countries do. And if you've got income from somewhere else in the world, but you're based here in the UK as a UK resident, then both countries effectively will want the tax, won't they? Because that's the way it works. They want their tax for the money you're earning there. And because you're a UK resident for tax purposes, we want your tax too. So what happens there is they have this thing called double taxation agreements. Let's just put that out there for you. Double taxation agreements. Now what happens here, and most countries in the world and the UK have a double tax agreement. And what it pretty much does is it stops you paying tax twice. If you've got income from one country, but you're still a UK resident for tax purposes, and we want the tax from that as well, and that country wants the tax, it stops you from being taxed twice, which makes sense really. Broadly, they split earned and unearned income. So that's something you need to be aware of. So let's keep the same colour there for you. You've got earned and unearned income. Now, earned income and unearned, you need to know the difference between those two income here. So you've got two types there. Pretty much do what they say on the tin, really. Earned income is income that you earn. from your graft, if you like, from your industry, from your self-employment, from your employment. You earn the money by physically working effectively, either using your brain or your hands. Unearned income is income you're earning, but you're not actually working for it. So you might have a property which you're renting. You might earn interest from a bank. You might have some sort of dividends from shares. You might have some pension income. This is money that you're bringing in, but you're not actually earning it, if you see where I'm coming from. They split the difference. Now, broadly speaking, what happens here is that if you have a double taxation agreement, then earned income tends to be taken by the country in which you earned it, and unearned income comes from the country in which you're resident. So my dad, for example, he lives in France. If he were a UK resident, I think he's a French resident now, then any earned income would be taxed by the French authorities, and any unearned income, like his pension, would be taxed by the UK authorities. That's broadly how double taxation agreements work. Makes sense, doesn't it? Lovely bit of terminology here for you. Now, the last piece of terminology I want to share with you is the one called domicile. Now, domicile is one that a lot of people get a little bit confused about. Let's just put it up here for you, domicile. Now, first of all, domicile itself really only worries about inheritance tax as far as we're concerned here. So that's the tax we're talking about, inheritance tax. I did mention it earlier that if you are a UK resident and domicile in the UK, you're liable to income tax and capital gains tax across the world. I said that, isn't I? So that comes into it. But for domicile to have its place in the CMAP syllabus, you're looking at inheritance tax. And what happens here is that you have a domicile, usually where you're born, or you take your father's domicile, which is where he was born. So it's your normal place of living. It's not residency for tax purposes, that doesn't come into it. Domicile is something you're given on birth, and it pretty much for most of us stays the same. So I'm a UK domicile, I'm sure you probably are too, although you've probably not thought about it, but you are. And that's the point, you're given a domicile at birth, and that's how you stay. You can change your domicile. You can have what's called a domicile of choice. So you're either in the UK, for most of us, or you can choose your domicile by moving abroad and then severing all links with the UK completely. And there's some actors over in the States that have done that, haven't there? Many English actors out there live and breathe in the States now, and they've severed all ownership of property or any kind of connection with the UK. And that's fine, and you can therefore have a US domicile. But for most people, of course, it is a UK domicile. What they also do is if you died, when inheritance tax, of course, rears its ugly head, if you've lived here for 15 out of the last 20 years, that's changed recently, by the way, 15 out of 20 years, you might have seen it quoted as 17, it used to be 17, but it's now 15 out of 20 years. So in other words, if you've died, and in the previous 20 years, 15 of those you lived in the UK, then you're going to be deemed domicile. That's what happens there, they deem you domicile. Let's sneak that in there for you. They deem you domicile, and therefore you're going to be domiciled in the UK, so your inheritance tax gets slapped. Now what happens with the IHT is if you are a UK domicile, they get you for inheritance tax on your worldwide assets. That's the key one. So if you've got a palace in Bahrain or a mansion in Myanmar, do you like that, do you? Then you will have to pay inheritance tax on those properties as well if you're a UK domicile. So that's some terminology there for you on income tax. I hope you found that of interest. Bye.